All right, we're back for episode 97 of Digital Divination. And again, we have the usurper joining us. Ron Lundeen.
Oh, don't call me that.
Yeah, in addition to the usurper, we have me, Ron Lundeen. I do want to say at the outset, I am a employee of Wizards of the Coast, but my opinions here are mine and not theirs.
Very good. I was going to segue into that, and so I didn't.
I think your segues have become increasingly clumsy. I thought I'd save that for you. So.
Oh, I thought the last one was funny.
Okay, the last one was very good. Very good.
Okay. All right. Very good.
I want to point out that my opinions are also not those of Wizards of the Coast.
That's true.
Mine.
I mean, it's not untrue, right?
Mine might not even be my own at this point. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, Lord.
I've been brainwashed. All right. Well, we are getting down to the wire. In fact, we were just discussing when that century mark would be hit. And we're not sure. So
who knows?
We don't know because we
I don't know, is it going to be this year, next year? Yes, it will be one or the other.
Keep an eye on the feed.
But it'll be special. It'll be a special one.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be important. But for this episode, we're going to talk about something that actually Ron and I encountered during a game that we were playing, and is how do you, as a GM, introduce a new subsystem to your players that you may either be using a lot or maybe a one-shot or off and on, and kind of how that process goes. And primarily because the way I introduced it, it didn't really work. And so now we're
but for the rest of it did, right? The whole everything to do with the exploration and the charter building and so on was all great. But it was specifically, you're talking about the Armada combat.
Right, which was new to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We know Starship combat fairly well. We haven't done it a lot in the Horizons of the Vast game, but all of us are sort of experienced Starfinder hands who kind of know our way around Starship combat a little bit. And the Armada subsystem is pretty new. It's pretty different. And it took me a while to realize that it's sort of conceptually different than Starship combat.
Yes.
Because each of the fleets can do its own thing. And almost, I think, the maybe a good way to teach that to people is to say, okay, real quick, we're going to do this Armada thing. Let me first tell you, here's what a fleet can do against maybe this other fleet, right? It's very sort of very board gamey, right? It moves this many hexes and it fights this far. But once you've got kind of that basic, your fleets are going to do their own thing, then you layer in, if you're a character and you're on one of these fleets, you get to have it do extra things or different things or the same things it can, but like way better. Mm-hmm. This is a pretty sharp difference from Starship combat, because in Starship combat, the ship kind of doesn't go without the characters to make it
the
go.
Players doing something.
Right.
But with an Armada, all you're doing is you're taking an existing big fight in space, and your presence makes it better. And that, I think, is a pretty big difference when it comes to figuring out what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be doing it in the middle of a big fight.
Yeah, you know, when I was thinking about the Armadas, it reminded me a lot about troop combat, where the troops did certain things and did certain damage and certain movement. But in Starfinder, typically it's you against a troop rather than you within a troop making that troop better. And so it wasn't.
Oh, you mean troops like a monster type?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
A troop ends up acting a lot like a swarm. So in To Defy the Dragon, there are troops of creatures that you and your mechs are fighting against. So it's kind of a little bit different thing. So getting back to introducing this particular subsystem with the Armada combat, it actually came out as Starship Operations Manual, which was out
Mhm.
a while ago, but I've never ever seen a modded combat in anything. So I think somebody, whoever wrote that book, and now I don't remember who wrote book 7 or book 6 of the AP Horizons of the Vast offhand. I'd have to look. Must have
Was that Landon
I
Winkler?
think.
Oh, I think it
I
was
think
Landon.
it was Landon Winkler.
Yeah, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Likely he was tasked with including that, is all I'm thinking. That was part of the.
I'll tell you,
Phillips.
yes, and Landon uses they.
Yes,
But
that's right.
yeah, it was a sort of thing that we were gonna. Yeah, it was coming out. We were gonna decide to use it, and it was close enough that I don't remember how much it was already out. If Landon had the information, or if I just kind of slotted it in after the fact. It may have been like placeholder text. You know what I mean? And then just sort of, the Armada stuff is done. Let's put it in, because I don't really remember the timeline.
And there's not
when book 6
a lot of it just refers to the Starship Operations Manual. It doesn't spell out
Right.
basic rules or anything for it.
Yeah.
So
it was because that was, it always takes up that, and you do a big subsystem like that, and it's in another book. There's always the tricky thing about subsystems and in core rule books, and then in adventure paths, like how much do you reprint? How much of it is complicated? How much space does it take up? Can you just point to the thing and say, hey, it's in here? I remember all the first, when you're doing Kingmaker for first edition Pathfinder, how much the kingdom building rules were, and how they needed to be like a separate document because we could not print them exactly. Or at least we reprinted them in the sort of player's guide, and how that player's guide got to be it's like 40 pages long or something like that. So it's massive. And I don't know how much of that sort of has translated over into the 2E version of Kingmaker. And but I did I remember glancing at it at one point, going, this is just as detailed of a thing. Whereas we had to, for Horizons of the Vast, kind of squeeze that charter stuff into the book.
Right, into book 1.
And so we had into book 1, right, and had a real finite page count. And so it's it's a little truncated, but it was meant to be a little simpler than Pathfinder's kingdom building stuff. So it can be tough. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that was in flight, because I wrote book 1 of that, and it was a lot of maybe the reward is that they get for completing this encounter is some benefit in the charter building system ?
Yeah.
Did Jason make it work?
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. It was because I was writing that at the same time as you were writing the adventure, and just sort of testing it out, making sure that it worked at least a little bit.
Well, what's interesting, so with the charter building, we probably spent the better part of our one session going through and figuring out how to make things and deciding how to do stuff and reading through that. Ron had actually studied it quite a bit and had a good sense on what to do. And a couple other people kind of played different roles and tracking things. We have it. And then with the Armada thing, because it was a one shot, because we were just doing it one time, I thought we could just, I handed out a bunch of the rules, kind of started placing things out. And I thought, okay, we'll just try to walk through this, because we're only going to probably ever do this thing one time rather than with the charter building multiple times. So I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on it. And I actually allocated about 40 minutes to do it, but it took that long just to set it up. And at that point, I could tell a couple of our players, especially the gentleman on my right where I'm seated, Ron, across from you, was not having a very good time with it. And that's why I decided to expedite things.
Well, I think so. And obviously you don't want to be pushing hard on a subsystem that your players don't respond to, right? If nobody's having a good time, don't do it, right? And if one of the things I found when I ran Kingmaker years ago, that I had to make sure the kingdom turns were pretty snappy, because I had 1 or 2 players that loved that, and the rest of them just zoned right out. And so I realized, all right, this is a thing that is going to really cater to these 1 or 2 people, but I don't want to do it at the expense of everybody else. So for a whole session. So it kind of
Yeah.
kept it kind of quick and snappy.
Yeah, I had that same issue basically. People that didn't. I don't think anyone sort of was checked out, but like I was the only one who really knew what was going on as the GM, how it worked, and so I was always just like, let's do an adventure. Okay, let's we've got about half an hour. Let's do like 2 or 3 kingdom turns real quick, just sort of make some decisions, and and then just sort of and then not think about it for another session basically. But it's not they didn't enjoy it too. Like they were enjoying the decisions, but they didn't think about it between sessions. Like you might think about, oh, my character is going to take this, or my character is going to take this, like this feat or this prestige class or whatever. So it was a little heavy lift for me as the GM, but also I didn't mind.
See, that's interesting. And for us in Horizons of the Vast with the charter turns, it's actually very light for me, in part because Ron and Scott, who kind of keeps track of everything we're doing, they really coordinate stuff, and everybody else kind of gets excited about. We've got some running jokes in some of the settlements we have, and when there's unrest for things that people are just kind of wondering, oh, what's going to happen now? What kind of exciting event might happen here? And a lot of it's how it's flavored in what we've been doing. So it seems like it's fun for most people, that part of it, subsystem, doesn't it, Ron?
Well, I think so too, and I think part of the reason is the charter turns that we run, and maybe Jason, maybe this is interesting for you to hear some real life how people are interacting with this. When I don't think we're ever at a point where we're like, oh, hey, here's here's a lull between the first and second parts of this particular AP. Let's just do a couple charter turns. We always, when we do it, we go into it with like a thing we want to do, even if it's like, oh, we want to make sure we connect enough of our charter territory to this hex that we found, or oh, we want to make sure we build defenses at each of our settlements, or oh, we want to build a new settlement, and hey, look, it has to be at least this many hexes from oh, hey, let's go out and explore this place and then go build a settlement there and then connect. We have goals, and we don't run just 1 or 2 charter turns. We'll run charter turns until we've met our goal, and then we'll go on with the adventure. And if that's
good.
If that's 1 charter turn, great. If it's like 4 or 5 of them, we'll do 4 or 5 of them really quickly.
Well, that's going to help you like make the whole AP take years in for characters, right? Which is what I kind of intended for it to work anyway, because it's meant to be like you're settling a whole new planet. Like it should take time. It shouldn't, because a lot of you go to an adventure and it's like, oh, now we go from first level and now we're 12th level, whatever, and it took us 3 days. Great. And it's just sort of like, because everything's at a rush, and there's so much like pressure to do things, and a lot of times people just fall that way. So yeah, I mean, like the whole point of the charter system was to be simpler than the kingdom building rules, because of my own experience with the kingdom building rules.
Well, that's a subsystem that seems easy to wrap your head around and get involved. And once you get into the flow of things, I think once we figured out the flow, the sequence, and for me, again, implementing, I actually made a separate binder for our players that had all the things that you could get, all the requirements, all the order that things would go. So everything that was kind of in the AP book that was relevant for charter terms, I reprinted, put in sheet protectors in a binder, and then Ron actually made a great map, laminated.
Yeah, I got a little worried that the markings we were making on like dry erase markers on the binder things we would put in between would get smudged or something, and we'd forget. So what I did is I did, basically it's the same thing I did with Kingmaker. I took the maps. In this case, it was just 2 8.5 by 11 pages, I think. For Kingmaker, it was 4 poster maps. It was enormous.
Yeah,
and just got them all laminated together, and then got a series of colored stickers. And they might actually be the same set of colored stickers we used in Kingmaker, because they've been at the bottom of my big gaming accessory box for a while. To be like, all right, well, the little red stickers are our settlements, or no, red stickers are points of interest, little name tags for our settlements, and green means there's a resource there, yellow means anyway. So it's got, and then, draw the borders, our weird kind of crescent shape of our charter, which at some point we intend to fill in, but that hasn't been on our priority list for a while. But anyway, yeah, getting that to be able to lay that out in the middle of the table and say, okay, we're going to do our thing that's here, right? Oh no, it's over here. Kind of keeps everybody focused on that. I think really well.
So having
that's
tools
real good.
laid out, it seems like it helps quite a bit.
Tools is important.
For that subsystem.
Well, and along the line with tools, I don't want to change topic if you're going to go to something else, but Starship Combat, you've got sheets that tell us the roles that each person does. That's super valuable for having a thing right in front of you, so you're not flipping through the book. Here's what I can. I'm the engineer. Here's what I can do. That's very helpful.
I was going to say something very similar to that, Ron, which is that, like, to go back to the sort of general question at hand, is like, how do you introduce these things? And if it's something you're doing a lot, charter building, Starship Combat, you're going to do that more than once, right? Having a set of tools and reference sheets and so forth out there for the players is super important. And it'll be very helpful. People will be able to look things up and not have to worry about going to a book or, like you said, going to Nethys or something like that, right? So yeah, that's something to prepare for if you know you're going to be using something a lot. Similarly, I think if there is something that you're going to be using a lot, like Starship Combat, for instance, I think it's helpful to have like an introductory tutorial type half a session, maybe, right? Here are the rules for this. Let's have a fight that's, I know, is only going to last like 2 or 3 Starship Combat rounds, and then it ends. And if you have that capacity to be able to do that, I think that'll, and a lot of times I think in terms of like video games, and you want to have that short tutorial level that introduces you to a concept, and not too many concepts at once, right? Maybe you do a short Starship Combat that's just the basics, and then you think about like, and when we get into the real ones, you'll be able to do a couple extra things too, right? So but that doesn't help you if you're doing something you're only doing once, right? Like Armada Combat or something similar.
Yeah, I think with the thing with Starship Combat, because everybody at the table was experienced players, and actually everybody but Ron were very experienced society players. We had done tons and tons and tons of Starship Combat. So that's a system that, we all learned through a very awful Starship Combat example in this thing called Into the Unknown.
Oh, that one's terrible. There's 2 of them, each more terrible than the last. That's
before they adjusted all the DCs and things. Yeah, which was the very first Starfinder adventure written by Ron Lundeen.
Yeah.
And I've run about 7 times introducing people to it.
But that's a really good example of what Jason was just talking about, because there's 2 Starship Combats in that, and one of them is just super simple.
Right.
Because it can't be anything other than learning it's the tutorial that you were just saying.
Yeah.
And then I think the second Starship Combat involves maybe a little bit of terrain and space or something. It's still super simple. And I remember being told even at the time, hey, when you write these, we know that in retrospect, these are going to seem like just ludicrously underwhelming Starship Combats because they're going to be just so simple and basic. But that's kind of the point.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. The issue with introducing people to them is that it makes it very long. Right.
Trying to learn it.
I mean, if you're doing that and more like a fight or 2, right? Like, and role playing, like all of that in one session, that's a lot. Yeah. So you want to, like, I would say, pare that down to be like, this is the Starship Combat learning session.
And that's actually what. So I ran it at PAX. PAX? No. It's the other one. Emerald
City.
Yeah, Emerald City. The convention that we had demo tables for Starfinder when it first came out, and you would run Starship, or you would run a combat, or you would run there's a social skill challenge in there. So those are 3 different things, and you could, if you completed all 3, then you got full credit on your little sheet, and you got a free whatever thing.
Right.
wasn't bad, but trying to introduce somebody to it brand new who never seen it, it would take 45 minutes, an hour to get through what was pretty simple thing. And I'll bring it back to this Armada combat, which I was trying to approach kind of the same way. I handed out rules to everybody, kind of set things up, and we talked about what things, but it was so different than what anybody had really thought about before, that it was hard for people to wrap their head around it. It pretty much what everybody said is this is something we would like to read a couple hours on first, or
a bunch.
Before we would even try to attempt it.
Well, this is something that I've done. If I know a subsystem is coming up in an adventure that I'm running, a session or two ahead, or even the end of the session before, be able to tell people, hey, here's this thing that's coming up. Here's 2 or 3 pages. And, I give homework, right? Here's 2 or 3 pages to read for next time. And then if half the players have read it, then that's great. That's a lot.
It's good. That's great. That is a lot. I was going to say.
Well,
yeah, and you've beaten the average, I'm sure.
That was my fault. 2 things. One, we hadn't met for like 6 weeks because people were traveling to Japan.
It had been a long time,
all kinds of stuff. And I hadn't read anything in books. I hadn't prepped book 6 until that day, so I didn't know. I hadn't read in detail. I kind of.
And it's kind of right near the beginning too.
Yeah.
So,
oh shoot! Now I got to do this. So, So that's another good thing.
Well, and there's a little bit. I'm interested to hear how this goes, because I have this from the developer side, but I don't have it from the player side. If you'll forgive me deviating into Pathfinder from Starfinder a little bit. In Bloodlords, big 6-part AP, there is an adventure where you're hunting somebody down in a town. You're actually hunting a bunch of people down. And when you go to one particular town, hunting them down is not a role-playing exercise. It's not a combat exercise. It uses the infiltration subsystem in the Game Mastery Guide. And some people have said it's just really jarring to all of the sudden have the pages and pages be like the mini stats that the infiltration requires, rather than something that's a little more narrative. I think that from a technical matter, it flows. From a narrative matter, it maybe reads very clumsily. I'm interested. One thing I haven't heard a lot of is how people think that feels like in play. To be like, oh, well, we just did a couple of, find people in a town jobs. This town find people in a town job was different in kind of a refreshing way, or no, suddenly there's these infiltration mechanics, we didn't know anything about them. How does that even work? So
is it narratively different, Ron? Is like that person hidden, or like you have to infiltrate the town by not showing yourself? Well, all the other towns you can just kind of like kick the door in and be like, I'm looking for this guy.
Yeah, well, in as light spoilery way as I can say, the person you're looking for is kind of a crime boss who runs the town, and so nobody in the town has any incentive to turn him over to these strangers that have come in.
Right.
You've got to sneak to get some information about location. Then you got to sneak to get the things you need to get. It's kind of a heist sort of feel, because you're trying to get at somebody who is actively hidden by everybody else in the town in a way that other people aren't.
Okay. Yeah. Like you said, narratively, it makes sense. Yep. It becomes tricky to bring that in. And all the Pathfinder 2 sort of like GM guide subsystems are like, have a sort of a similar through line, in that like you're doing some skill checks to kind of like earn points, essentially, right? Like you're doing victory. It's sort of like, they're all kind of like victory points. So, I don't know how jarring it would be if you've done if there's anything else in the AP before that's like the research subsystem or a chase or something like that. So, again, it all comes down to like just sort of knowing your group as always, and kind of being able to prepare them, and being able to like you said, John, you kind of, I think you pivoted about the Armada stuff. So like, just pivot if it's not working. Like you can prepare all you want and present all this stuff and have even 1 or 2 people on board, but it might not end up working. So you're going to have to be flexible enough to be like, well, okay, well then let's just have a fight instead or something.
Yeah, and I was gonna you kind of mentioned something, and this ties a little bit with what Ron was saying about the infiltration systems. So in Starfinder, there's also quite a few chase kind of there's a chase system in there, and they've had it for land chase. I actually wrote a sea chase in one of my adventures. There's space chases, as well. They're all kind of set up similar, where you have some skill things you do. There's some obstacles that modify the results of those skills, and then it's almost like a contested role versus who you're chasing and who's chasing you. And those seem I don't like chases a lot, because they're different than the narrative and different from a lot of the combat things we do. But still, people seem to understand those because they're close enough to the type of skill checks and things that they would normally do. Right. Conceptually, they can understand it. And I guess it would be the same thing with Starship Combat. Once people understand what their character can do, what skills they can do, and the effect it has conceptually, then they can understand it. I think with the Armada, and Ron was kind of getting at this when we were playing, and this is where I failed to kind of explain it. If you can, with that new subsystem, kind of put it conceptually what your character is doing with your skills and how that affects play, then I think it's easier for them to tie it together.
Yeah, that's right. I was playing a precog, so I looked right to it's not the magic officer, but it's some equivalent. I'm like, well, this is obviously what I'm going to do. It takes mysticism. All right, well, I don't need to learn what it's like to be the admiral of the entire armada, right, or a captain of of a fleet even. I'm going to be the magic person, so it's only that. One of the things I think that that surprised some of the players in an unpleasant way is it wasn't immediately clear if you're doing stuff in Starship Combat, you're making your skill check. So you're like, oh, I've got, engineering plus 17. I'm going to add plus 17 to a thing that I do. In the Armada system, you take the number of ranks you have and then basically divide it by 6 and add 2, and that's the bonus you give to the fleet you're on. So somebody was like, wait, I've got like a engineering of plus 17 and I'm going to give plus 3 to the Armada? Well, that's not a lot. But from the point of the view of kind of the mini board game that Armada is, plus 3 is actually a lot. That makes the fleet you're commanding substantially better at whatever it is you're adding your plus 3 to. And I think that wasn't necessarily immediately obvious.
Yeah, it wasn't actually obvious to me either. So I'm glad you put that. All right. Yeah. So any other last words about incorporating subsystems in Starfinder?
I think if you're doing like something like a chase that you might be only doing once, or some other sort of like something that's in an AP that's like, oh, this is where you're making some rolls and accumulating some points to win a Brutaris match or something like that, right? Like those little short ones, I think you can just hopefully they are not too complicated, and if they aren't, you can just kind of spring them on play, like just sort of like do the thing where you're the video game engine, or you're the games, to put this in ancient terms, text adventure parser. Just tell me how you want to do it, and I'll give you the rules. I find that sometimes when I have a group that switches games a lot, game systems a lot, and oftentimes it comes down to be just tell me what you want to do, and I'll figure it out in the rules, right? Yep. And then I'll tell you how that works. Oh, just roll that, right? Nice. So you can do it that way, and that'll at least give the players will still be able to act in character and do things they want to do, not necessarily have to worry about like min-maxing the exact, I better do this exact right skill check, otherwise we fail the whole thing.
Very helpful.
Yep, I think so. All right. We had some questions from one of our listeners, who's the one that always seems to send us questions, Russell Sinclair, who, as I mentioned, wrote guidance for Starfinder, and his Pathfinder version is called Guidance for Pathfinder. So it's on Roll20. So he messaged me about that when we talked about it on the show.
Nice.
Another question that he had concerns if there's a new book that comes out. For example, we just had Starfinder Enhanced released last month.
Mm-hmm.
As a GM, how would you use this book in a session? So something new comes out, and how would you immediately incorporate it? Would it be something you would pick and choose things? I guess part of it depends on if the adventure is tied closely with it. So like Drift Crisis and the Drift Crisis book and Drift Hackers and things like that.
Yeah.
Or like Starfinder Enhanced, it's just there. And one of the questions going to come up is, hey, we have this new thing. We all just leveled up to 11 or 12. We just leveled up to 12. Can we start picking things from this?
I mean, my answer is yes. Right? If it's a book of player options, you can't as a GM decide how to use it. And that is a bunch of player stuff, and they get to decide how to use it. If there's anything that's like, I mean, I'm not going to necessarily know everything, how everything's balanced in the game too. So it's going to be like, yeah, sure. And if it ends up skewing things the wrong way, then we have to talk about it, right? But this is in a way too also where like and I'm pretty sure when second edition Starfinder comes out, they'll probably use this sort of stuff too. The rarity tags and
right.
Pathfinder second edition sort of work, right? They were like, oh, I want to use this thing, and I'm like, okay, is it good, or is it uncommon or rare or whatever? And if it's like rare, that's what I'll need to check it beforehand. But everything else is just kind of like, yeah, it's fine, it's probably fine. Go for it, go nuts, and then tell me, you figure out how it works and tell me about it when you're using it, so that we are all on the same page.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
No, I think that I tend to be a little bit more restrictive, and this comes from my 3rd edition D&D, 3.5 edition D&D days, where people could have stuff just that sprawled across 20 or 40 different books, especially in sort of the organized play game. So I try to restrict things. It also helps restrict them thematically. If I say like core +1, right? You can use the core rulebook. You can use the advanced player's guide. The kind of the key books that are set up in the game, or Starfinder core rulebook in this case, plus one other book. Like, if that's your thing, if you want, guns to be your thing, then you get the core books plus guns and gears. If you want to be, like, I've decided my precog character is basically core plus galactic magic. That's all I've got. I've decided I wanted to be the magic person. So I sort of restricted myself to core +1, just because that means it limits what I have to carry to the game. It limits what I have to know.
Well, yeah.
If there's a particular rule, I know it's that I've got on my character sheet, and my character sheet doesn't give me all the information I need for it. I know I only need to look in one of 2 places, so I'm fast, right, when it comes to trying to figure out what it is how I play. But I think that so that's what I do with the characters. To answer the question, in perhaps maybe a little bit of a snarky way, what do you do if there's a new system that comes out in a book? I'm like, well, if it's a Paizo book, you wait for them to write the adventure or adventure path around it, because they will, right? Oh, I sure like mechs. Well, guess what?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what you said before around like limiting stuff is definitely great for newer players, right? And especially because they can be like, oh, just pick 2 books and go with it. But like, I mean, does that hold for when you are in the process of a campaign? I have you have your precog, and then something really cool comes out for that precog in Starfinder Enhanced, say. Do you not let yourself take it at that level? Do you just do you go to the GM and be like, well, core book, but this one's pretty new, so can I just sort of smoosh that in?
Probably the latter,
+1,
right? Probably the latter. I'd probably be like, hey, this thing just really, really sort of strikes my fancy and what I wanted to do for my character. Even though I was restricted in these rules ways, could I use this kind of thing? That would be the case given the rarity system that you mentioned that Pathfinder 2 and Starfinder 2 are going to have, is where I might come to something that's sort of uncommon or rare and be able to say, hey, there's this rare thing that I'd like to be able to use. It's marked rare for a reason, I'm sure, but I would love to play a puppet, or I would love to be able to cast anti-magic field, or whatever the rare rules item is.
Yeah, I think one issue with limiting books in Starfinder is that, as compared to Pathfinder Second Edition, there's a whole lot more equipment, right? And depending on your class in particular, you might want to draw, because the core book is, the core book, and then say the armory might be the two minimum that you would want. But then, there might be something really cool that came out in Galactic Magic or Tech Revolution, whatever. So, especially like every book has like fusions and things like that just kind of add on to things. So I have a harder time with it. And in fact, in Starfinder, I don't really care. Right? Starfinder,
Right.
it's
just
wide
just
open.
Throw
for
it
me.
on in.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we play society play. Once it's been cleared, whatever rules that aren't society legal are highlighted, I'm fine with people doing whatever. And I do, like with Jason, if I don't know what it is, I learn because the player tells me, and if I think they're interpreting it wrong because it seems like that's way overpowered, I look it up, and we do this. I was just listening to our Intrepid Heroes broadcast, and we were talking about operative things, and like, oh, well, let's go look that up. Here we are, 18th level, and we're still looking up a pretty basic thing because of a new weapon that our operative got. And turns out that you can't do that with this particular weapon, whatever. So I don't feel the need. I know a lot of Starfinder. I don't feel the need to have to know absolutely 100%. I'm happy to have a player explain, even in organized play, if we're doing something and they're playing a class I'm not really familiar with, I'll ask them, well, how did you do that? And, how's that work and things like that. So, but I think for Pathfinder, kind of what you, Ron alluded to, I think that is a little bit easier because you can get so much equipment, right? Just out of a couple of books, and things like that. So I don't know. I think that's a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean, for Starfinder, you might want to be like core, and then one equipment book. Maybe that's Armory, maybe that's Tech Revolution, and then one other sort of character options book.
Yeah,
like if you want to be an evolutionist, for example.
Brackets.
Yeah.
Just to sort of narrow things down for newer players or whatever.
Right.
But then eventually, but not necessarily say you're restricted to that, but just like maybe look at these sort of subset, and then see.
I think you're doing a disservice to Paizo, then, Jason. You want everybody to buy all the books so they have them all. And they get all familiar with them.
How else are you going to know what you want unless you buy them all?
Of course,
and look
then
at them.
read them all.
I don't know what
read them all
cover to
cover.
That's a good point.
That's
right.
Yes,
exactly.
What this does,
exactly.
You actually, that's the right answer for a lot of GMs who are homebrewing their. I mean, for as much as we play a lot of the adventures and a lot of the adventure paths, we're all well aware that there are plenty of people who don't. The GMs who just kind of make their own stuff up. And GMs who make their own stuff up, as soon as they see some sort of, whether it's a player-facing rule that they can give to one of the foes they're going to fight, or they can place as treasure for their characters to find, or whether it's some sort of subsystem that they really like a narrative Starship combat, like, heck, I'm going to use this right in the very next session. They've got no constraint to wait for it to appear in print adventure or try to shoehorn it in. They're like, I'm ultimate control over what goes on, and I'm just going to use this thing that I saw that I think is neat immediately. And that's kind of a fun aspect
lore.
Of that. Oh,
too, Ron. Like, lore piece, right? That's just like, this planet, it gets introduced in near space, and we should all go there. Let's do it. And then they can just plop it in. So yeah, like, if you have that freedom, great.
Yep. Very good. Well, this has been a lot of fun again. So I'm glad we can
meandered all over with our subjects. I love that.
Yeah, but we only we talked about two things, so
there's two.
We're kind of on
we
track.
talked a lot about those two things, though.
All right.
That's what we're here for.
Okay.
To talk a lot about a couple of things.
Of course.
That's right, and we've done it 97 times so far.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Ron, I'm glad we could get you again. We're gonna keep trying to get you. For sure, at least for the 100. So we'll see what happens in the interim. So, all right.
Yep. All righty.
Well, I'm John.
And I'm Ron.
And I'm Jason, and this has been Digital Divination.